Yep. Do we want to wait for Christian also? The first thing on the agenda that I did put was to just talk about the project status that he has compiled. Maybe we don't need to talk about it at all if the document is quite explanatory.
Yeah, I read it and I'm happy with it to publish it. There were a few comments that went backwards and forwards, and I think it's most of that, if not all of them, have been resolved.
Okay, I had just some updates about Federation, so we can
Hold
talk
on,
about.
before we go there, so Greg and I think Michael's there. Are you guys happy with that? Maybe you're muted at the moment.
Yeah, actually, Christian was not in the room yet.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Yes, now
we can.
Okay.
Is Christian going to be here today? Do you know?
He should be, yes.
Okay, maybe we should defer that until he gets here then, because I think he was kind of running with the project status document. It looks like it's pretty much complete and has had comments and ready for publication, but Christian can confirm. Sorry, carry on, Irfan.
yeah, I was just trying to get from other folks if there is anything else on the agenda that we might want to put now, or we can go ahead with the only pointer that I have put on the agenda, which is about Federation updates.
I think there were a couple of follow-on items from the last agenda. There were like some to do, so maybe we can
there were two items. I'll share the screen. So this is the agenda notes from last meeting, and two items that were here were about the document that Christian has published, and I was expected to complete the release and documentation for Federation. So I have some updates about that. So these are the two things I will put in the agenda today. If there is something else that we might want to, that's what I was trying to get from other folks. If there's something else we might want to talk, then we can talk about that.
Yeah, I think go ahead, Irfan.
Okay, yeah. So last week we did hit some problems with the CI in Federation. So one update, like which was not very obvious from the update in Christian's talk, I have given comments about that, was that we are doing some stuff actively in that Federation repo, trying to fix some issues, and whatever queries are coming in, we are trying to respond to those queries. And one blocking pointer was the availability of release binaries. We did hit that issue mainly because of permissions and all relevant to the Google projects that are and the buckets that have been historically used for hosting the binaries. So that has been sorted out, and we have both the image and binary available at a particular location, but one thing which is pending is that updates of the release notes and the release location as part of the repo, and some updates in the documentation pointing to the correct location. And some portion of that was also delayed because of we hit some CI problems. And one of the problems that we did hit was after the update in KTest, one of the latest updates in KTest. So last couple of months, what has happened is that the KTest apps API has been moved into apps, and they have been gradually promoted from beta 1 to alpha 1 to V1. And last week and sometime around Thursday or Friday, KTS also moved storage of that API to the same as apps V1. And what we have been using here in storage is extensions V1 beta 1. For some reason, the defaulting between both these versions is different. Ideally, I mean, I'm not very sure about this particular stuff, but ideally, what happens is that backwards compatibility is maintained. So whichever defaulting mechanism or whichever defaulting values are the ones that are used to store in the registry, that is what is populated back to the user. But because of the skew in what Federation is using and what KTS was using, we were having such failures. In, I mean, it was failing everything, the pre-submits also and the PI jobs also. So what we have done right now is we do not have the apps V1 as part of the vendor code that we have, but the same defaulting logic was available as part of apps V1 beta 1. So that is what we have used for storage for deployment APIs, which solves the problem for now. The next step what we are doing is that we are upgrading the vendor code to NFL HS 1.9.3 to be exact. That PR is also sort of complete, so we will be merging it shortly. And additionally, we also did add one release job, which what basically it does is that if a tag is present on a particular commit, which we can tag saying that this is 1.9.0 or whatever version that we want, it publishes the release binaries also to the designated location. So these are the updates about the ongoing work that we did last 2 weeks. Apart from that, what we have also done is we have basically tried to label issues in the correct mechanism. Most of it was done already, thanks to Quinton, while they were in the earlier repo. What we have additionally done is that some issues which are simple to do, but it's just like they have been pending there for some time, lack of resources or people there to work on them. We have labeled them as help wanted and good first issue kind of things also. So if you go to Federation repo and just search for these two labels, you would have at least 10 plus issues which can be something which new developers can try to pick up and get their hands dirty on. There are many other issues, especially relevant to Kubernetes, its usability, and there were some pending things which were needed to be done before we started moving out of the code repo. There are almost 40 of them. And because Kubernetes is a tool and the functionality might be easy to understand.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm wondering whether we shouldn't perhaps deal with that in a sort of Federation specific part of the meeting, maybe at the end, because I'm not sure everybody here needs all the detail of Federation specific stuff. So maybe we should deal with the general multi-cluster updates first, and then we can, whoever's not interested in the Federation specific stuff.
Actually, that is what I was trying to get the some input from the folks available here. That is there something else that we want to update? We can certainly go ahead and talk about that first.
So I guess we just need to wrap up now that Christian's here, wrap up the document that he wrote and whatever the final state of that is. And then maybe anyone who's not interested in Federation, I guess, unless there are other items for the agenda, we can move on to Federation specific stuff.
Yep. Christian, do you want to give some update about the document, or you think that comments and whatever has been put up there, it has already?
Yeah, I sent it out last Friday. I got a couple of comments, updates. I reflected what I thought needed to be resolved. I don't know if there's anything outstanding. I plan to convert it to Markdown course, that needs to be separately LGTM, so there's still another opportunity to put comments once it's in
Okay.
Markdown.
Cool.
But I think I'll do that sometime early this week, maybe today. And hopefully we could point to that as the community page, maybe even in the Slack channel. It's be useful to have what the time of day is in this SIG for people joining the Slack channel and expecting help. Because right now there's still a little bit, I mean, there's offsets between what the documentation says. If you go to Kubernetes documentation, high level, top level documentation, and as a user, you'd think that, federation is active well and being worked on, at least the V1, and that's currently not the state of things. Many people within the SIG are working on different things. So I don't know how to, even once we put that document into Markdown and it's in the repo, maybe we link to it in the topic of the Slack channel. Maybe that's not the best thing, but it's at least the first step. I'd argue that as a second step, and this doesn't necessarily need to be done by me, we should probably look at what we want to do with that top level Kubernetes documentation. A lot of the workloads APIs have gone GA. A lot of what I would call single cluster Kubernetes has gone GA, and that's reflected in the documentation. But it's somewhat unfortunate that alongside that same documentation, there is how to federate your cluster, and right now we're not really staffing that effort in its current form.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, Christian. I think we should just put a header at the beginning of every one of those documents referring to, what the current status is it going to go GA, etc., and just so that everyone's clear on what the status of that stuff is. I agree, it's confusing.
This is Arun. So I have played with Federation a few months ago, and at that point, I tried several ways to set up a simple federated cluster. I could set up a cluster, but deploying an app was quite painful. And as a matter of fact, I filed almost 3 or 4 bugs, for that, and I never got it working. My team led the Kubernetes on AWS workshop, which is on AWS samples repo. We were never able to showcase this to any of our customers. So essentially, I think a fair understanding of, and again, I'm joining this group for the very first time. I'm a principal technologist at Amazon, focusing on open source and containers. So I think any understanding in terms of what is sort of the party line in terms of federation versus multi-cluster would be very helpful, because our customers are constantly asking us about that guidance, and the documentation seems to be confusing as we were just talking about it.
So hopefully the document that's being shared right now should alleviate that concern. If it's still not clear, then you should probably raise another concern. It's hard to be less confusing when there are multiple parallel efforts, but hopefully we call that out appropriately in the document.
Okay, well, I need permission for the document. I just tried to access it, so I've asked for access. But once I have access to the document, I'll definitely take a look at it. I'll join the Google group as well. So I will definitely go through the document, and I'll also share a link to the Federation sort of workshop, so to say, that we created, but we were never able to deploy it. So I'm willing to give it another shot, because that is a question that our customers often ask. And this could be, bring your own Kubernetes cluster. I've been trying this with EKS. Well, EKS, is a different level altogether, but it's still a restricted cluster at this point of time. But as things evolve, those are the kind of things that I would like to try with EKS and see if I can set up a federated cluster. And within EKS team, as we talk about it, we would like to kind of build our own understanding. What is it that we should recommend to our customers? Should it be a multi-cluster or a federation approach?
Yeah, we'd be very happy to help in that regard. Certainly, if you want to overcome some specific challenges with a federation, for example, we could help you. And yeah, I mean, it's a bad reflection on this SIG, I guess that your questions went unanswered and you weren't able to get it working, and we can certainly do better at helping there. And then also in terms of giving you advice on what future options you and your customers have, and which ones might be suitable for what use cases.
Great. Yeah, I just dropped a link to the Cluster Federation workshop that we created. And for now, it is actually in a work in progress modules section, because we have never been able to get it working reliably, or at least nobody ever actually got it working in terms of federation, where I could deploy using kubectl that deployed to this federated cluster, and now my pods are deployed across multiple clusters. So once, and I'm happy to tag along with anybody who can help me get this working or figure out what's going on. And once we have it working, then we can move it to the main section. Or if multi-cluster is the approach, then I'm happy to go that route.
I can suggest. I mean, I'm not sure. I think I have been trying to. Trying to keep on the look for the new issues that pop up in the publishing repo, and try to actively answer those. I'm not sure which one is the issue that I missed. I'll still try to dig it back again. But you can certainly reach out to either me and Irfan, and or Shashi to solve this federation stuff that you are talking about.
Okay, sounds good. Perfect. I think that'll work really well, because all I would need is maybe like an office hour for half an hour to an hour, where if we can get this working, because it really helps with the visibility of the effort of this group. And I'm happy to help with that, because we gave this workshop 3 times at reInvent. We gave this workshop at KubeCon. And again, people were asking, oh, why this section is not working? And now we are giving this again at KubeCon Copenhagen. If we could get it working before then it'll be awesome, because then we can actually include this as part of the workshop.
I think we can certainly do that.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I've noted the names. I will reach out to you guys.
Would
the Slack channel be the best way to talk to you?
Yes.
Okay.
What sort of problems are you looking to solve with federation?
Well, I mean, our customers are looking to do the federation primarily because they could set up a federated cluster between east and west, and now they can say, okay, now go ahead. They can create stickiness, and then I can say, you know what? Okay, create my pods, distributed between these 2 different federated clusters. So instead of doing that, what we have been recommending them is that, okay, set up your separate clusters, set up your Jenkins or your code pipeline in front of it, and then do manual federation, so to say. And I'm saying federation quote unquote, because essentially as your git commit happens, instead of doing your pipeline doing, the kubectl doing the federation, your pipeline is now doing the federation and deploying across multiple clusters.
Yeah, actually, we've seen a lot of customers or a lot of people in the community do that as well. Like or sometimes people don't want like fancy distribution logic that like a controller should figure out how to distribute stuff. They just they check it in the GitHub repository that they want exact number of, let's say, like 3 replicas in each cluster, and then probably they have autoscaler independently set up in each cluster.
I think the joy is, because the feature exists, sometimes customers just want to use it, and
Right.
If a feature exists, I think we should either look at supporting it fully, or we should say that this feature is not fully baked in, or this feature is not working. And I think that clear guidance, independent of what our customers are doing, would be still very much relevant. And I consider myself fairly well aware of the Kubernetes concepts, and if I couldn't get it working, I'm sure our customers are much more lost.
I think it's fairly accurate to say right now that users are not expected to get it working. At least Federation V1 in its current state is, we're not actively working on it. I think the stewards of it are mostly Irfan. And I know we wanted to talk about this later in the meeting, but I'm somewhat concerned about changing the group versions to GA in Federation, because that reflects basically that the base version of Kubernetes has gone GA, but the implication would be that Federation has gone GA through the API, whereas in fact, the actual implementation isn't even in beta form in some cases. So I'm somewhat afraid that if we go down that line, I understand that it's easier to compile Federation and get it somewhat working. But the reality of it is that the implementation of all these controllers has not matured to a point where we would expect users to have a functioning federated cluster.
I agree because not even once, and I deployed the federated cluster. I tried to deploy the federated cluster a few times, almost 5 or 6 times actually, and every time the amount of time for the federation to come up was quite a while. It could range anywhere from like 10 minutes to almost up to 40 minutes, and certain times I waited 5-6 hours, and the federation wouldn't happen actually. So to me, it's unreliable and does not work, and it's not predictable. So I'm afraid to call it GA in that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's any claim at the moment. I mean, it is confusing because there are these separate concepts of an API being, either alpha or beta or GA versus, implementation of controllers that use that GA, that API. So it is a little, it's very confusing, and we need to make it more clear in the documentation and or adjust the API specification to make it more clear, and we can do that. There are definitely people working on this right now, and will continue to, and there will also be V2 of the API and of the implementations, which is the longer term plan.
Also, for us, at least in Google, we've had to wrestle a lot with making sure we have the right tool for the right problem. And often I understand your situation of, hey, there's something out there, we want to show people how to turn it on. But once we try to go to production with solutions at Google, and we start working with users and customers and even just ourselves, it became really, really important to understand what problem people wanted to solve. Because sometimes just having a bunch of checked-in configs took care of a lot of their problems and was a very good, scalable, well-understood solution. Some of the customers really didn't need to go the full federation route, because it's a lot of it's a very powerful tool, but it's also one that requires a lot of ramp up and understanding. So we keep hitting home, what problem do you want to solve before bringing in solutions into production.
Of course, and I wasn't trying to go with a golden hammer syndrome here. No, I was just trying to see that if this works, and I even talk to my customers, because in the early days when I was trying it, I was excited about it. But then when I realized this thing is not even working, so I pretty much end up talking about it to any of our customers. And then the more I'm talking to customers and developers, and even in SIG AWS, as a matter of fact, when people are deploying COPS-based clusters, they're just doing federation using a pipeline as opposed to using kubefed.
Yes.
Okay, this is a really good update. I will join the Google group. I will take a look at the document, see where it stands, how does it look. And then of course, I'll reach out to Irfan and Shashi on Slack as well.
Excellent. Thanks for the update.
Okay. So we have some other point that we want to talk about today.
I think on the agenda there is nothing else. So if anyone is interested in remaining in the room for federation-specific topics, I think Irfan's got a bunch of outstanding issues that are currently worth working on, if anyone wants to chip in there. And we can talk about those for the next 30 minutes, seeing as we have that much time left. Okay, go ahead, Irfan.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I will just open the. Yeah, so a little more update to you, Arun. Let's see what happened in the last quarter of of previous years that we did decide to move the federation out of repo, and that is where there was some amount of flux, and there was a time that there was no fixed location for the federation release binaries, almost 3 months of it, and that is also one of the main reasons a lot of confusion came in for the users. Currently, the status of the documentation which is available at KTS.io documentation is that documentation is a little old, but the mechanism to federate and how to use more or less remains same. The only stuff that probably breaks is that the documentation points to some release location and the binary that might not be found. As I was updating a little while ago, that problem has now been resolved and the binary locations are fixed and the binaries are actually over there. I have to basically update that documentation now. Apart from that, Christian would also, or any of us can probably update maybe the header section of the documentation saying that federation is subset of multicluster and the active state of development or the active state of that project could be listed out in a separate repo, probably a community multicluster page.
Okay, thanks for the update. So I will reach out to you on Slack unless, I mean, I would really like to, I mean, I personally like the concept of federation. As we talk to customers, we are trying to ask them, do they really need federation or do they need multi-cluster? So that's sort of an update that we're getting from them on a regular basis. But once I understand it, then we can start talking to them that, okay, this is actually possible and this is a reality. So let me know when the docs are updated. I'll try to attend this SIG as much as I can. And otherwise, I'll start a Slack discussion and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, I think it would be, I mean, just to sort of wrap up that part of the discussion, it's become abundantly clear that there are some customers and some people who have relatively simple use cases and are comfortable doing a fairly manual process of checking things into GitHub and then rolling that thing out across multiple clusters. And then there are other use cases which customers feel like the federation approach is more suitable. And we're likely in the future to live in a world where both options are available for an ongoing basis. We have staffed the federation project. It was, we went through a bit of a rocky period over the last year or so, deciding what the appropriate API was, and there was some, a lot of cycles burned up moving things between at least between source code repositories and discussing what the various API options were and whether we needed the simpler, I guess, workflow-based approach that you mentioned earlier. But I think for the most part, those things are resolved themselves now, and work will continue to build a stable GA federation as well as stable GA alternatives to federation, which will allow you to do the kinds of things that you mentioned earlier.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, now, well, I had one more pointer here. I was talking about one issue that we faced recently because of some update in how or what version it is used to store the apps API data in KTS cluster registry, KTS registry. So this question, I know we have talked about this earlier, and rough conclusion I remember is that it doesn't matter which particular version we basically use to talk to the KTS cluster. The one that we expose, from the federation control plane or the federation API can still remain as one of the V1, Beta 1 or Alpha 1 kind of APIs, so that it at least conveys the meaning of its state relatively more clearly, right? So this question was just to conclude and confirm the same thing. If somebody has a different opinion than this, then please let me know.
Well, so I don't want to kind of drag this out too long, but I guess if we're going to change what we do, we may as well make sure that it makes the most sense we can. So right now we have a bunch of GA things, GA API objects, GA from the point of view of Kubernetes, exposed via federation. So replica sets, secrets, config maps, etc., all GA, I believe, and they're exposed as GA in federation, but the control plane may not be GA for those API objects. So we either need to be consistent and change everything to reflect the GA-ness of the particular federation controllers that we've built, which I'm not sure is the right approach, or we need to be consistent and say we expose the whatever the appropriate version of the resource is, which may or may not be GA in Kubernetes, and we need to be consistent with that and make it very clear in the documentation that, for example, the controllers for these API types may not be GA or are definitely not GA at this point. But at least make it very clear the distinction between an API version and a controller implementation for that API version, and not create unnecessary churn by forcing various pieces of the system to be renamed or manually overridden in terms of the API versions to convey something which actually doesn't relate to the API version so much as to the implementation of the federation controller for that API version. That was a long story, but does that make sense?
Yeah, so what I understand is that one mechanism to do that is we can leave, for example, config maps is exposed to a V1 API. We can leave it the same way it is right now and make it explicit in the documentation that this is not a V1 API, but the controller for this, it is just federating the Kubernetes V1 API, and the controller for this is currently either beta or some stage like that.
Now, there's another concern, which is that if we continue to do that, so right now there is no plan to make the current controllers GA that are based on the Kubernetes API. So we would need to make that very clear that this API is GA as far as Kubernetes is concerned, but the controllers for it in federation will not become GA. And so that is confusing. So if we want to address that explicitly, what we can do is take all of the federation APIs and explicitly make them all non-GA, i.e. go backwards in some cases.
Okay, I'll update this later.
Maru,
so,
do you have any opinion on the way forward?
I think I concur with your opinion, which is why I'm not speaking up. Sorry.
Okay, so is the decision that we roll all of the V1 Federation API types back to non-released, non-GA?
I mean, are any of them actually GA at this point?
Well, I mean, the actual types are, in the sense that secrets,
like the underlying Kubernetes.
config
the
map,
KTS, yeah, KTS types.
I mean, to me, this just represents like the challenge of the V1 model, where it's just reusing the API. There's very little room to differentiate the Kube version versus the Federation version. Like you could document it, but it won't be explicit like in the types.
But I mean, we actually have the same problem with Kubernetes right now. So, I mean, you can have a node API which has been GA for however long, but under the hood there's a scheduler, and you can plug in whatever scheduler you like, and some of them may be GA and others may not. So the API doesn't actually give you any indication of the stability of the underlying implementations. It just tells you whether the API is likely to change or not.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I guess what that's reminding me of is that the current mode in Cube ecosystem of defining an API version on your API, like on your REST interface, and really that captures two things, and maybe both of them not very well. One is, like as you say, the API and whether it will be subject to future change, but there's also the backing implementation, and maybe it only really refers to the default implementation. But like something like replica sets is like, oh, that's V1, that's GA, and it's backed by a controller. Well, that controller can change in all kinds of ways potentially. You could swap it out and put something else behind it, as long as it's nominally like compatible for the purposes of the compliance test. That's fine, but you don't get any indication what's backing the API really. Does that make sense? Yeah,
exactly.
So yeah, we're still stuck with that sort of conundrum. I don't really know if there's I don't have an answer, that's for sure.
So I don't know what I mean, it seems to me we have three options. The one is to just leave everything the way it is and not progress anything beyond what it is at the moment in Federation. So if the API supported in Federation says GA, we just don't change it because it is GA config maps or GA secrets or whatever the type may be. And rather than rock the boat and try and go backwards from there, we just leave it there. And potentially we freeze all the API, well, I don't know what the right word is. What is the thing that is alpha or beta or GA? Whatever that thing in the API is. Is it a version? I'm not sure. But we can just leave everything the way it is. Basically, do not move anything forward. Or we can move everything to reflect what it really is supporting. So for example, if we currently support replica sets and replica sets have just gone to GA, and we are consistent with that API, which was finalized at GA, we could reflect that in the API. I think that's technically more consistent and kind of makes sense logically, but will definitely create some confusion, perhaps more so than we already have. So I would not recommend that route. I'm hesitant to recommend the route of like rolling everything back to say it's all alpha, even though previously it was called GA, and the same thing in Kubernetes is called GA, but we're supporting precisely the same API, but we're not calling it GA. That seems also confusing. So in summary, at this point, I would say we just freeze it at whatever support we had, whether it's 1.8 or 1.9, and we just say we're never going to support anything beyond that. We'll make that work, but we're not going to progress stuff from alpha to beta to GA. The API is now frozen for V1.
Yeah, I have a suggestion for that. So currently, even if we try to choose a route where we roll back the versions of those APIs which are already listed as V1, we might not have an older version. Say in the fact that say we choose to roll back everything to alpha, many APIs might not have an alpha version available because Kubernetes itself has stopped support, backward compatible support for them.
Yes,
one
exactly.
solution is, so the suggestion that I have is that currently we are going to put some releases, right, or at destinations, or we are going to label a release. So we label that release as beta, whatever version we use. Like in currently what we are using is matching version name to KTest, and at the release location what I am listing is that this release basically maps to or supports a particular KTest cluster. For example, this release I have labeled as 1.9.0.beta something, and it maps to 1.9.x clusters, means you can predict 1.9.x clusters using this. So we never make it a 1.9.0 only release. We always name it as 1.9.0 alpha or beta.
Yeah,
and
that makes a lot of sense to me. And I would even be hesitant to use the word beta, given where we are today, because we don't plan to progress it to GA, which is, I forget the precise definitions that we have for alpha, beta, and GA, but I'm pretty sure alpha may change and may never support into the future. Beta is not quite finished yet, but will progress to GA, etc. And so that was always the plan, but then of course we changed the plan. So I would be inclined to call all the releases from this point forward, call the release alpha, and use the API versioning, which is whatever the current API is consistent with, and not move that forward. Does that make sense? Yeah.
It makes sense. And the meaning of this also, I can try to make it explicit on one of the federation documentation or release page.
Yeah, certainly the release bundles can be called alpha, and the release notes can say this is alpha. And what's in the actual API support is whatever version of the API we currently support, which may be GA or alpha or beta, whichever the type may be.
Okay, makes sense. It makes sense.
Does Maru, do you think do you agree that that's the best of the several unsavory options we have at this point?
Yeah, it sounds reasonable.
I can't think of a better one. I'm not super happy with it, but it seems better than the other ones, the other options we have.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Right. Should we move on to specifics? I know Leah is here, and I think she was quite keen to cut her teeth on some issues. If we have any available. I might even be able to take one on if there's anything useful that I can do. Do you have a...
Yeah, so the first things what we can look for is what I have labeled it, and those are mainly Kubefed related ones. And Kubefed, if you search, you will find many of them. In fact, there are close to 40 issues on Kubefed itself. And many of them are usability related. So what people can look for is the help wanted and good first issues. This itself will, I mean, at least help wanted has 10, and if you look for good first issues, that would also be some similar number.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There are 7 of them. Okay.
And I guess...
Yep.
Just briefly, I was going to say, I mean, we're going to have some default tool for rolling out Federation, whether in V2 as well. You're still going to need, an API server and everything to be deployed somewhere, and it seems like this is a reasonable thing to do. So
yeah,
works is a good idea.
That is the reason I was still keen on sorting out issues that Kubefed might have. I have not listed, there has been one category of issues relevant to Kubefed, which was RBAC related. I have not basically included those in this listing, which is for new developers or whatever, because they might be one a little more complicated. Second, we are still not really sure how exactly we might want to tackle that particular problem for newer control plane or a different control plane if we are going to do it the same way. So this is one. Apart from that, there were many documents, not many, at least 5 I know documentation issues. So they could be searched with. They are labeled with doc. They are also good, a very good starting point to. Yeah, kind documentation. Oh, only one is there, others are closed. Yeah, so this is also a good starting point to pick up a documentation relevant. There are some more things which are needed in documentation. I would probably go ahead and create them. So this, I guess, might be a good pointer for people to start. Apart from that, if we remember, there was this backlog that we used to maintain. So there are more complicated items over here, which either I or Shashi are intent to pick up in due course of time. But this is one location. The sheet is listed as part of the meeting notes, which is at the top of the page, at the beginning of the notes, which is listed as an engineering roadmap here. So this lists items which we are currently working on, and it also lists some items which are not currently assigned but are as part of the backlog, and we might basically work on them. So why I mentioned this is because if somebody wants to tackle more complicated issues or more complicated problems, they can have a look at this and can think of with me or Shashi to maybe go forth about it.
Okay. Lindsay, you're there. Are you interested in contributing anything here?
I'm working on some cluster registry stuff right now.
Okay. And Leah, were you wanting to pick something up?
Yeah, I think that was a really useful overview. So I'll try and check it out today and pick something out and see if it's appropriate. Check with you guys first.
Cool. Yeah, I think that, Irfan, can you flip back to that list of issues quickly? The adding a flag for timeout seemed both simple, useful, and will also give the person who does it an opportunity to test kubefed and actually deploy a federation and verify that it works. Add the timeout flag and verify that works, and then it'll set them up for doing some of the documentation stuff after that once they've actually deployed something. That make sense?
Yeah, do you guys assign the tickets or?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay. All right, yeah, I'll take a look at it and assign myself if it looks like something I can take on.
So that number 118 looks like a good one to start on. And we can definitely kind of hold your hand a little bit and help you get going there. Cool.
Awesome, thank you.
One point there might be that if you are already not a Kubernetes org member, it might not be possible to assign issue to you. If that is the case, let me know. I can proxy the assignment for you. I can assign it on either on me or Shashi, and then we can think of it. You can always comment on the issue.
Cool.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything more than this to talk. Let's just can be done one-on-one.
Cool. See you guys tomorrow.
Okay. See you later.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.